Let me make sure that you guys are seeing the right screen. Okay, yes, you're seeing the right screen. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. So we are going to go really quick over what we were doing before. So this is still how Islam builds homes. And we talked about a number of different things. We left off at the slide in talking about al-mawadda, but let me just first, I guess, put you in this area. What exactly are we talking about? We were just talking about the different priorities in Islam. In other words, especially for women, what are the priorities? How do I organize them? Or is there such a thing as a priority in Islam, where is everything really at the same level of responsibility? So we said that no, they're not at the same level of responsibility. Just like when we talk about different areas of deen, and we said it's like a prism. Yes, it's one white light, call that Sharia, and then you put it in front of this prism, and then it basically would divide into, at least it would disclose the 7 different colors, or at least the primary colors right there. And that's the same thing. So you've got, this is Sharia right there, and those are basically the prism, let's call it the primary colors that make up Sharia. So we did talk about that piece of it. And we also talked about, well, okay, pertaining to me as a woman, and certainly every Muslim is responsible, but me as a woman within the household, what are my priorities? So we talked about the different areas of responsibility, whether the husband, the children, or the house. And we said, well, we got to start dividing them and breaking them down in order to understand how I see these responsibilities, how I regard my priorities, and how I relate, of course, to the different categories and what actually I should consider as my responsibility or my priority, or at least, of course, what I should be doing in relationship to that. So we said we were going to use this general rule, which is the principle of Sharia, and we said it's basically DNIAM or DNAAIM. Okay, at the end, this acronym basically stands for Deen as spirituality, nafs as life, ird, chastity, A as mind, and aql, and M as mal and wealth. And we talked about, this acronym in these different areas of what we consider as priority. And we said we're going to apply them to each and every single one of these. So we did talk about the deen for the husband, the nafs, the aql, the mal, etc., in relationship to, well, what I should be doing. So I'm not going to go over that. And then we went farther and we said, okay, so if my responsibility towards the husband is basically the DNAIM, well, how do I get into putting these principles together? How do I, kind of like when you have a piece of puzzle, but then you have these pieces, like, okay, I understand what this piece is, I understand what that piece is, and how do I put these pieces together? So I said, well, to put these pieces together, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically breaks it down for us and says, وَمِنْ آيَةٍ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. So I said, what we were going to do is basically break down again these ayat and connect it with the other ayat to understand, well, okay, well, how do I get to that? Think of it as therapy that we are trying to do, whether before we start the marriage or within marriage. I'm trying to understand what the Quran is telling me in order to understand how to make this type of a relationship that basically is bringing in the responsibility in place, the peace, the stability, certainly all those different pieces, putting them together to fall in. So we said litaskunu, and we said, well, this is talking about a second, and this is also talking about al-mawadda, and this is talking about rahma. And then we said, okay, well, if we're talking about second, what makes second? And then we went into another ayah and we said, okay, so the ayah is giving me three different items that it wants me to scrutinize and consider it as a foundation for the relationship between the husband and wife in order to basically reach to the goal of second. And you can consider that second is pretty much the center, and I guess it's the main cornerstone for this whole lecture when we're talking about second. Because when we're talking about the word second, we're talking about home, we're talking about stability, we're talking about peace, we're talking about tranquility, we're talking about, well, what is expected? What does a good, healthy home look like? What is it based on? So then we went into this ayah and we said, well, the ayah says, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. Okay, those three different elements. Number one is that she's salihah. Number two, she's qanita. Number three, she's حافظة للغيب. What does that actually mean? How do we connect these combinations? So we went in details with these combinations and we said, so salihah basically means that she's got a foundation, whether in her relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or her relationship, when we talked about that relationship to mean principle, the principle in understanding that we, as a husband and wife, we would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our foundation is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our center is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, when I obey my husband, it is not the type of obedience that, yes, that he is superior in a sense of somehow degrading me or making me be inferior, because at the end of the day, is that this isn't the superiority where you become the center, because the center is Allahu Akbar. And we related this piece of it with the ayah, فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and if they obey you, then don't transgress the limits and take advantage of their obedience, because the Lord Almighty then ends that ayah, فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. Why? Because إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا. Just to let you know that the Lord Almighty will retaliate. If this man abuses that woman's weakness, that woman's obedience, that woman's perhaps maybe a moment of vulnerability where she's not able to exit this marriage, maybe she doesn't have a good financial, I guess, situation that can help her basically get out of this abuse that this man is probably causing. So then this guy might actually abuse the situation because she probably doesn't have money. Maybe she doesn't have supportive family. Maybe she doesn't have, I guess, the means to defend herself, etc., hire a lawyer, whatever it is. So we've got these cases, and I know these cases exist. And I have many, many, many stories that I had went to, went to and was actually in different courts and you know different situations that are really heartbreaking. So I know that these cases do exist, but I refuse to make these cases as the case for each and every single woman. Okay, I recognize that this isn't everybody, but I do recognize these cases exist. Why am I saying that? Because feminism tends to bring in very rare cases or random cases and then lets you connect with that emotionally in order to pass down or to perhaps then make you compromise on a lot of principles to make it seem that, hey, listen, if you don't sympathize with this story, then therefore you're not sympathizing with women. And I would say, no, that's not necessarily true. I will sympathize with this one case perhaps because it's an exceptional case, but I refuse to make any type of lawmaking or legislature or decision making based on some kind of an emotional manipulation, and that I recognize that I go back to Quran and Sunnah, and that's basically going to be my place of definition, on my place of understanding legislature and understanding what it means to basically make the fair and just legislature and rule. Okay, now going out of that, now, I don't want to get into all of this feminism thing. Okay, فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب. We went in details with the word قانتة, and we basically went into the word قانتة, whether on a spiritual level or whether قانتة to mean that her centricity is basically her own home. And I would like to get back to that feminist piece. And, there's one thing is that I want you to, just get out of this for a little bit. This is extremely important. When we talk about the rhetoric that we're seeing today, the rhetoric that is basically indoctrinating us and that is spread around, whether in social media or presented to us in therapy or schools or it's culture right now. And by the way, when I say culture, I'm not talking about one piece of culture, but we're talking about this globalization that is shaping cultures east and west and all over the world. It's becoming an international culture where one type of culture is infiltrated in the minds of a lot of Muslims all over the world. So I'm seeing the same trend that I had seen in the US. Right now, I'm seeing it in Palestine. The same trend. I would get questions coming to me from Pakistan, questions coming to me from Bangladesh, from India, etc. And you're like, I'm seeing the same exact mindset. What is that? Well, that's basically indoctrination that is going far beyond borders. And certainly, you have an agenda that is shaping our views and shaping our minds. But let me say one of those agendas, and what is it? It's basically that feminism. And when I say and I talk about feminism, the reason why when we're looking at قانتات فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب, the reason why I'm talking about feminism is because it comes from a completely different premise, from a completely different foundation. Feminism comes from the foundation that life is just a race and a competition to be basically in some sort of power, a competition where it is the survival of the fittest. And in order to basically be fitter, they're basically considering that you need to compete with men. And what kind of competition are we talking about? We're talking about authority. We're talking about money. This is basically considered as the main power that they are basically let's say pushing women towards. It's a competition with men on money and position. That's why if you were to look at the different things that feminism is basically wanting to support, it's always, well, does she have the right to work? Does she have the right to become a CEO and pushing women? You want to be a pilot, you want to be this. It's always trying to compete with men, or even if it's things that would really contradict her biology or her social dynamic or her creation, but it's always trying to somehow get women out of their own instinct. Okay, keep this one in mind, because when you look at Islam, Islam considers that it's not money that we are trying to run after. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ما أريد منهم من رزق وما أريد أن يطعمون. What I want from you is not money, and I'm not asking you to feed me or to even to even think that you are just supposed to be a money-making machine. You're not a money-making machine. Okay? And number two, of course, when we're talking about Islam, it tells you, your purpose of life is not to be a money-making machine, and certainly is not to be in authority. Because in Islam, it's just as we would say, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. Islam also tells the women, the men as well, that رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَإِقَامِ الصَّلَاةِ, etc. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the men the same thing, that don't run after money. لا تلهم تجارة. I don't want you to be a money-making machine. ولا بيع عن ذكر الله. I want you to focus, and I want you to run, and I want you to head to the remembrance of the Lord Almighty. Yes, I want you to get a job. Yes, I want you to do al-khilafa, and basically, building on earth and making this place a better place to live on, and there's no question about that. That is actually the crux of your responsibility. There's no question about that. But I don't want you to be a money-making machine. So Islam, whether in men or women, tells them that your center is not the center of making your competition in making money or putting authority, but both men and women, your center of stability, keep that one in mind. Your center of stability is basically in your own fitrah. In your own fitrah. Why is that important? When we say your center is your own fitrah, part of your fitrah is marriage, is making family. That's part of your fitrah. In fact, that's a key part of your fitrah. That's why if you look at Islam, it considered that deen nafs ird aql, or deen nafs aql ird mal, considered that it is actually part of your own foundation for justice. It's part of your rights. It's part of what brings stability to you, which is making family, which is reproduction, which is basically part of what would bring you that stability. We're not talking about a side thing. So then, therefore, when we talk about فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ, this is also in response to what the different, whether it's feminism or perhaps maybe in the future we might get another trend probably called something else, etc., coming from different perhaps different philosophical views or different maybe economical changes, etc. So Islam tells you, I want you to recognize that there's a foundation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in you, and the key thing to bring stability within you is that you would live up to this. You would live up to being a salihah. You would live up to being a qanita. You would live up to being hafidha lil ghaib and preserving the privacies within your homes. That is the key thing to make you happy. There's no question. Yes, I definitely would want women to perhaps excel in school. Probably there's nothing wrong if she was capable of probably getting a job. That's absolutely fine. But of course, within the conditions that she considers her family best, and does not become at the expense of her own stability, which is basically making family, and certainly not putting too many on her plates, and certainly family comes first. Okay. We did talk about hafidhatul al-ghaib, and we said that it is a key thing that Islam was considering, that in order to live in the stability, that they have to live to a certain level of confidentiality, and therefore not expose too much about the different things that relate to deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal. Okay, so what do we mean by that? If your husband or if your children have shortcomings, do not expose it. Number two, nafs. If there's a certain disability or different things that are probably happening within your household, teach your children not to expose that. Aql. If for perhaps maybe at one point, your husband or yourself or your kids, some kind of a mental issue that probably rises, probably depression or whatever it is. Yes, sometimes it's okay to put in, different family members, but limit it because you don't want to make yourself or your family more vulnerable to others. The more you expose about yourself, the more you will find people intruding and giving themselves the permission to intrude, to judge, to dictate, and certainly to perhaps maybe think that they have the right to even get involved in what decisions you make within your own family. So when we're speaking about aql, this is also a key thing. If your child, for example, studying is struggling in school, you know what? Teach them not to expose too much. See what other resources that you might have, or even if it's your husband, struggling perhaps maybe with just a moment, a phase of things just going not necessarily the most ideal situation. We go through these different phases, and just keep that one in mind. Seek the resources that are qualified to be resources and don't expose too much of yourself. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasized hafadhatul ghaib, because Islam wanted for yourself to stay strong, wanted you to also appear and feel strong, and wanted you to make sure that you don't expose too much of yourself, because he wants you to be identified as a mu'min that is qawi, a mu'min that seeks the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we learn from the different prophets, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانِ, of course, on basically the mouth of Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam. And same thing when إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, when we talk about, of course, how he wanted to ventilate, but he knows that he's going to be ventilating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the second that you expose your weakness, you basically become an easy target for those that are seeking victims like you. So don't expose too much. And remember, turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when things go wrong. Is there anything wrong with seeking help from people that may be the ones to uplift a certain hardship? The answer is no, but make sure you limit the number of people that you tell and the number of people that probably get involved in your life. Limit that as much as you can in order to maintain your confidentiality, your privacy, and certainly to lessen the let's call it the possibility of other people intruding. Because the more you tell, you're going to find yourself having more numbers that may be a candidate later on to probably harm you in different ways. So you want to limit these numbers of people by basically limiting what you say and limiting the number of people that know about your information. So we said deen, aql, ird. When we talk about ird, we're speaking about different information that regards to the relationship. And we also wanted to say that the relationship between the husband and wife, whether we're speaking about intimacy, or whether we're speaking about certain relations between you and your husband, etc., all of that, keep it confidential, because you want to make sure that you don't get people envying you. You basically don't want to bring any others, perhaps maybe that you don't want within your relationship, without you realizing. The more information in regards to al-ird, whether we're speaking about your husband, or whether the husband's speaking about the wife, or whether we're speaking about the children, etc., keep it as confidential as possible. So therefore, putting that you went on, I don't know, some kind of a trip in certain parts of the world on social media do not put this information. You'll just make yourself more vulnerable to hasad. Do not put information out there, and it's okay. It might feel good to get likes and people coming and commenting, mashallah, that's so great, etc. Right. But you want to keep in mind that the number of people that see your post, 90% of them do not care. And even more than that, do not care. Okay. And you have a very small number that may care, and in other words, these people that may care, they care. You got one group that may care because they just want to know your information to intrude. And the other people that do care, they basically care to see you happy, etc. And that's a small amount of people, but don't let a post, or at least your information, be out there for the 90% of the people. If you know your sister cares that one day, you went this and this, and you guys, you had fun on that day, you went to this restaurant, the food was great. Okay, very nice. As women, we like to share our experiences. It's even part of the joy that we had probably at a dinner out or whatever it is. It becomes part, just talking about it, it becomes part of living it. I understand as a woman that many women just enjoy just talking about these things, okay? But limit it to the number of people. If, let's say, you wanted to share it with your mother, you wanted to share it with your sister, just share it with them. Don't share it with the 90% that don't even care. When you share it with the 90% that don't even care, you actually start losing your honor. You know why? Because your honor is really about the amount of secrecy that is in your life. 90% of the people are going to get into your personal information, and then without you realizing, you're out of the 90% of those people, you're just inviting, even if it takes one person to ruin your life, you're inviting, out of these 90 people, you're inviting perhaps 2% of these people that might actually use your information in the wrong way. Why even expose it? Even if it's you know what? Even if it's one person, it's enough to ruin your relationship. It's enough to ruin your relationship. Just learn how to make your life as within the border of hafidhatul lil-ghaib. Having that being said, the fifth one, which is mal, how much income you are making, how much income your husband is making, or how much you're spending, the cost, the money management, and your idea on money management. And, you spend this much probably on food, this much probably on, I don't know, designing your house, this much, you decided to buy 2 cars, you decided to buy 1 car, you decided all of that, hafidhatul lil-ghaib. Preserve your privacy. No need for people to know about your income and how you do your money management and how much you spend on this and that. Because guess what? When you tell others about your income and about your money management ideas, that's basically going to get others involved to then get into at least letting you perhaps get judged. Oh, she's spending so much on I don't know, car insurance, or she's spending so much on designing her home, or you know what, this is where she failed and she should be putting her money, allocating more money in the kids' education, or allocating more money in perhaps maybe buying a better car, etc. I've got my way. But guess what? You don't have to be telling people I've got my way and say I've got my ideas and I have my um uh my theory about what is a priority and how I would want to allocate how much money for perhaps personal use or food or probably education, etc. This is you to basically manage. you and your husband to basically manage and figure these numbers out. But guess what? Once you tell other people, they're going to impose their ideas and basically start dictating that, oh, you know what, she's spending so much on food, oh, she's spending so much on dining out, or she's spending so much on clothes, oh, she's spending this. Well, you're the one that invited them in when you disclose this information. If you didn't disclose it, there would be no conversation. Remember? The fish would only be caught only if it opens its mouth. So if you didn't disclose it, they would basically have no data to comment on. Don't give that data. Stay with al-hafidhatul lil-ghaib. Don't give the data. And once you don't give this data, that's how you would maintain your borders, by basically limiting the data that is put out there, whether about your deen, about, hey, we've got shortcomings. My husband did this one day, my daughter did this one day. Limit the data that you share with others, and you will see that there's going to be less involvement, less, let's say, people interfering. And once you have less people interfering, you're going to find yourself living at peace, because each and every single one of us has their priorities and their preferences about what makes a better home, what makes the best way of money management, etc. You've got your preferences. You learn mistakes. It's okay. You can learn from other places about money management and which is best and how much to allocate for this and this. Maybe on the day that you might make the taxes, this much is allocated for food, this much is allocated for car and transportation, this much is allocated for dining out, etc. That's up to you. But I guess you'll learn your mistakes once you basically find yourself short at the end of the month. Then you probably need to review your money management theories and ideas and then figure something out. You'll learn from your mistakes. But trust me, you'll be capable of learning more from your mistakes than actually having people intrude and imposing their way of life. They're probably living their own way of life, but then it's not necessarily bringing them the best of, let's say, the best of perhaps decision making, and probably even the best of ideas, or even the best results. That's their that's their choice. I don't have to live their choice. And what basically fits their situation may not necessarily fit your situation. You have a different income. You have a different family size. You probably have your preferences. What makes you comfortable may not make the other people comfortable. To you, what matters is probably a clean home, a nice fancy home. Someone else, they're like, no, to me, I live 90% of the time basically outside, and I would rather spend, this much basically for the household and less for probably on food, or more on food, or whatever it is. So now we understand at the end is that you've got your preferences, you've got your situation, your circumstances. You decide on your own. You decide based on your circumstances, but don't let others intrude in that. By not disclosing basically your information, you're keeping yourself safe. Okay. Let's zoom out for a little bit. So, من آية خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة. Let's go for the المودة. Of course, the ayah basically says, well, لتسكنوا إليها جعل بينكم مودة ورحمة. So therefore, السكون is not enough. السكون is a foundation, but that's not the only thing that marital relations were created for, or at least why we have marital relations. Okay, what is the rest? There's mawadda and rahma. And when you say mawadda and rahma, this waw right there can mean that something is a synonym. It could also mean something is not necessarily an antonym, but a different kind. So in other words, it's a different category. So let's look at each and every single one of these. What is al-mawadda? Al-mawadda, the Prophet ﷺ basically said, أكمل المؤمنين إيمانا أحسنهم خلقا وخياركم خيارهم لنسائه. So the Prophet ﷺ said the best, in other words, the most perfect ones in faith. So when we say perfect, what are we talking about? Complete? Well, this isn't necessarily to say complete, but this can mean near completion. This can mean that, think of it as a chart or a graph, and this is talking about, where the higher you go up, then you're basically getting close to really getting up there to really being complete. So this isn't necessarily that the person had really reached the complete level, everything is perfect. But then the Prophet ﷺ said, أحسنهم خلقا. The best of that the best of faith is that the one that basically has the best of manners. I want to look at this one. Is this necessarily just making it exclusive to men? No, it's not exclusive to men, because when it says أكمل المؤمنين إيمانا, this is talking about men and women. But then the hadith continues, خياركم خياركم لنسائهم. The best of you are the best to their wives. Well, in the same sense, of course, you could say that this was directed at the man, but the same goes to women. The best of the women are basically the women that are best to their husbands. Just like when we said to the men, that the best of the men are the ones that are best to their wives. And that's the same thing. The best of the women are the ones that are best to their husbands. Why? Because there is another hadith. The Prophet ﷺ even said, الدنيا متاع وخير متاعها الزوجة الصالحة. That life, or at least dunya, is a place of entertainment. And the best entertainment, the best pleasure that you can get is a zawja salihah, a pious wife. Now, how do we get to becoming a pious wife? I would have wanted to do DNAIM, but when you look at il-mawadda is involving heart. Il-mawadda, the word mawadda actually comes from wadda, which basically means to be warm. It means to be in heart. It means to basically bring about some sort of affection. That's what it means. So when I looked at that, what would actually make warmth? Where is al-mawadda supposed to be in? Like, how do I scrutinize that? So I basically looked at the different areas that the hadith basically described the different areas of that relationship. So I thought, okay, when the hadith basically talks about rifq, or when the hadith talks about lowering the gaze, etc., then we would basically see that what goes on inside the heart, it basically is a combination of what happens and what, let's call it, consider it as, you're talking about this main piece in the middle, but there are different areas, the different data that basically flows inside the heart or inside the brain or inside the body, whether what goes on inside the heart, and in other words, the motive, or whether we're speaking about the eyes that gives us the data, how we see things, or whether we're speaking about the tongue. So we're talking about the five senses right there, whether we're listening, we're talking, touching, etc., all of these different areas that basically make let's call it this these entrances, these nerves, these wirings, they basically all connect, and they would send this information all the way to really then become, let's call it, cooked within il-mawadda. So let's see where we got this from. So we got al-qalb right there. The Prophet ﷺ basically said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ رَفِيقٌ يُحِبُّ الرِّفْقَ. الرفيقا إن الله إن الله رفيق يحب الرفق وإن الله يعطي على الرفق ما لا يعطي على العنف وعلى ما سواه. The Prophet ﷺ basically said that the Lord Almighty is Rafiq. Now, when you say Rafiq, you're talking about, Rafiq can mean two things. Rafiq can mean companion, And Rafiq can also mean someone that is gentle. Okay? So what else? So when you say gentle, what are you talking about when you say gentle? Rifq is to recognize the pain, the challenge that the other person is feeling. So you get involved and you recognize their pain and you live it and you try as much as you can to uplift the hardship off of them. That's a rifq. A rifq. So let's say, for example, I'm holding a piece of glass. Okay. I recognize that I have to put down this piece of glass gently, because if I don't put this piece of glass gently, this piece of glass might actually break. So I'm so gentle and I recognize the vulnerability, the fragility of this piece of glass. So I basically live, even if it meant that I have to put in some amount of, let's say, special care, and I have to pressure myself to make sure that I consider the situation, the circumstances, the context of what I'm holding, so I become gentle. In other words, I recognize the fragility of whatever I am holding. Same thing. Inna Allah rafiqun yuhibbur rifq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that people would be gentle. And that's the same thing. This is a general statement. And that's the same thing whether we're speaking about a husband towards the wife or whether we're speaking about the wife towards the husband. Live with rifq. What does it mean? Live with your husband as a companion. Live with your wife as a companion. Understand that moment when she probably has her period on that day, or she probably is going through perhaps maybe some hardship during this time, or when the kids are back home, she's just multitasking so much that she can't handle more tasks at that moment. So please reduce from your task. You know what? Go ahead and help yourself rather than give more stuff as on her plate and make her feel that, okay, that's it, I can't handle it. Maybe you should get involved. Inna Allah yuhibbur rifq. Same thing with your husband. He probably comes in from work. You never know what happened. He just came in. And you're not really sure what happened, but you could see on his face that he had this social intelligence and just read, what does it look like on his face? Does it look like that he's not ready to talk? Maybe he's just had a bad day. Maybe you can delay your complaints about, X or Y and Z about your kids. Maybe you can find another time. Maybe we can write things differently. Do we necessarily have to right now just, hey, the husband is in and right now I'm going to throw everything on him right now because I'm basically just not having a good day myself? Or are we going to live in Allah rafiqun yuhibb rifq? Are we going to live where we would contain one another and compromise with one another? When you say contain, you talk about compromise. That's rifq. That's a rifq. A rifq is to be gentle with one another, to recognize the pains, the vulnerability, the fragility of the other person with me. And guess what? Not until we feel the fragility, vulnerability, and the challenges, the pains of others, will others feel it with us. Once we live that rifq, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُعْطِي عَلَى الرِّفْقِ مَا لَا يُعْطِي عَلى الْعُنْفِ وَعَلَى مَا لَا سِوَاء وَعَلى مَا سِوَاهُ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would even reward for this type of gentleness more than what He would probably reward other things for. You might get qiyam al-layl, you might do, donations, etc. All of that is great. But guess what? Being gentle and being a person that contains other people's challenges, other people's pains, that's a form of ibadah. That's a form of what will complete and even let your iman perhaps get near to perfect. And that's jabr al-khawatir. That's also coming in to really show that you care. Guess what? There's no better companionship between a husband and wife than that. What usually happens, especially in the day and age that we're living in, is that we're always looking at the person and say, hey, this is what you need to be doing. This is what you should. He didn't feel with me. He didn't love me. He didn't need to do all of. You do your share, and then the other person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that that ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. You put in what is good. You put in the حسن الخلق in that person that probably was not your best companion. That's what will bring in العشرة. That's what will bring in companionship. It comes with time. One day she felt that I basically am going through a hardship because I basically got unemployed. I lost my job, etc. But she came in and basically comforted me and said, you know what? I understand we're going to go through some, hard situation. We need to do more, better money management. Let's see what we could do. Let's see, support one another. And probably got yelled at from his boss or whatever it is. How can we support one another? How can we be رفقاء? Well, that's one side, that we really have to be gentle. We really have to be compromising. We really have to understand each other's pains. And not until we have social intelligence, and learning social intelligence requires that we speak less. The less you speak, the more you'll be capable of identifying the changes, identifying the motives, identifying people's behaviors by silence. When you are silent and when you speak less, you're letting your brains have the ability, the silence, to read the different patterns that surround them on people's behaviors, on people's motives, on people's perhaps this dynamics within this household. And guess what? As women, the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us that we have that. Yes, we have that. Where did you get it from? That there's a hadith. Listen to this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ had said, ما رأيت من ناقصات عقل ودين أذهب بقلوب ذوي الألباب منكن. Woo. Look at this hadith. What does it say? Well, the Prophet ﷺ says that I had not seen creatures, okay, that lack their ناقصات عقل. They are less in their aql meaning in their determination, and even in their religiosity. They're not praying as much, they're not fasting as much, and they're not committed to a masjid as much, but they actually have a certain capacity that other men may not have. أذهب بقلوب ذوي الألباب. They would be capable of controlling that man's mind, that man's power. When he's around men, all those men, macho men, they're basically not daring to probably stand in front of him. He's basically the big boss. But when he goes home, this big boss becomes controlled by Mrs. Boss. She becomes the real boss. Thought he was the boss. She becomes the boss. She becomes the person to control in the background. It was quite interesting. You had some great khulafa in history. Some great khulafa in history, they were actually controlled by their women, or at least I don't want to say controlled to literally mean controlled, but influenced, and women had a great influence on their decision making. And I mean certain khalifas, like Sulaiman al-Qanuni. He was Sulaiman al-Qanuni he ruled, I think it was like for 44, 43 years or so. But he loved his wife so much that she was the one that was also making this influence on his political decision making. This is a Khalifa that was in the Khilafah Uthmaniyya, ruled for 43 years. Okay, so here we go. So much for the Khalifa, basically right there, in front of people. He was the big guy, but the truth of the matter is that there's a lady in the background that was controlling everything, I guess. Whatever. But at the end of the day, the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us that, ladies, you've got a certain type of an intelligence that other men do not have. You're capable of doing things that men cannot do, which is learning how to read men and their behavior, their motives, what matters to them. You're capable of altering and knowing how to use those powers in reading those patterns on this man's behavior, and even have your influence in redirecting, reshaping this man's deen, this man's akhlaq, this man's preferences, this man's management, etc. And then you've got the power. But of course, I'm not here saying use it for, manipulative reasons or using it to sway things, but we're saying the Prophet ﷺ was letting you know that you have a certain power, but in order to get that power, what do you want to do? You want to make sure that you speak less. The less you speak, the more capacity and the more potentials you're capable of fortifying and enhancing in yourself to be able to read these patterns. But if you're continuously talking, then your brain is not reading those patterns, but your brain is busy basically helping you make words. And that's a problem. If you're just making words and writing these reports, then you're not, if you're just writing these reports and, saying these reports, but you're not giving yourself the time to read the circumstances and read the situation that is in front of you and read these patterns and investigate and scrutinize, then you got your data wrong and you got your reports basically gone with a wrong interpretation. So you need some time. And that's why it's important. In order to be a person of influence, okay, ladies, use this for a good way, use this for a good cause, okay? Do not influence your husbands to the wrong cause. And I'm sure, mashallah, I'm sure, we've got good ladies here that are going to use it for good reasons. There's that number two right there. Win the heart to win the argument, or winning the heart is more important than winning the argument. We get so fixated on winning the argument, but guess what? If you're so fixated on winning the argument, the chances are when you win the argument, you just created an enemy without you realizing. Why? Because each and every single one of us will take this matter personally. The second you start criticizing that person or criticizing me or whatever it is on the inside, we may just pretend like, yeah, we're pretty cool and we're pretty easy about it. Thank you for telling me. But on the inside, we feel broken. We feel hurt. We feel attacked. We feel that something somehow cracked something personal about our own honor. So winning the heart is more important than winning the argument, because when you win the heart, guess what happens? When you win the heart, the person is not going to take the matter personally, and especially if it's men, okay? Especially if it's men. In the men's world, even if you look at animals, the men's world, it's a territory for them. Whenever they feel being challenged, targeted, that's when they go violent. And once they go violent, then there's no place of negotiation, no place of communication anymore, because we're all just going to be focused on beating each other up. So winning the heart is one key thing that the Prophet ﷺ was letting you know, that وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching the Prophet ﷺ, if you would have been فَضًّا, what is al-fadh? Ilfadh is a person that may use harsh and and let's call them these comments that may be فظ, فظا غليظ القلب. The word الفظ is the person that may use harsh comments, that may be pushy, that may be a person that is probably attacking personally, etc. That's الفظ. But how does this happen? غليظ القلب. غليظ القلب, what goes on in your mouth and how your tongue speaks, it really comes from what is in your heart. If your heart is غليظ القلب, if your heart is thinking that you are basically better than that person, your words are going to come up interpreting what is actually in your heart. If you're thinking that somehow you're above that person, your words are going to sound and are going to come out sounding, I am better than you, I'm arrogant. If you are sounding and if you are soft-hearted on the inside, your voice, think of it as a musical instrument. It's that musical instrument. So learn that area of how you relate with your tongue, the art of voice. That art of voice will not change unless the qalb in itself is basically rahim al-qalb. You don't want this man running away from you. You don't want your home, your children to feel that they want to separate from you. Then make sure that your qalb is basically not ghalid al-qalb. It's not, what is al-ghalid? Al-ghalid means thick, but al-ghalid can also mean hard. Okay? Hard or thick. So this is definitely an idiom, an idiom. It's a metaphor. Okay. But this is basically looking at it that when you are not accepting others, when you're insisting on your views, then what you're going to see is that other people are going to feel that they cannot blend with you because it's either your way or the highway. Once you only, unless it's the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then definitely you got to insist. But you also need some space to learn when is it differences of opinions that perhaps maybe I need to compromise? When is it that no, there's only one opinion in this and that's a haram, halal thing. There's no way for me to compromise. But if we're not talking about that area, then, let go if it's not that serious. So therefore, learn how not and when not to be ghalid al-qalb. Because there are certain times that certainly this is a final border in Islam. This is a strong border that there's thawabit. I cannot give up on that. But if it's not that in that situation, generally accept and learn the art of controlling your voice, to speak a voice of rahmah, to speak a voice of ta'ah. For women, a voice of ta'ah is different than a voice of perhaps authority. Can my husband speak a voice of authority? Certainly. Even though, yes, we would like that he not necessarily speak a voice of authority, because at the end of the day, خيركم خيركم لنسائه. Be nice. Even if you have the right to tell me to clean the house, reach out to the heart. And trust me, no matter who that person is, when you reach out to the heart, even if you had the right to do something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is your right to basically impose it. People accept better when it basically honors them and gives them the respect and gives them that containment, than actually thinking, well, I'm the man and I'm going to tell you to do it and basically practice my arrogance on you. Yeah, guess what happens? You might have gotten to that, but there's going to be a limit where that person is going to feel that one day, sure, I did obey you on that. But guess what? That person will one day literally spit you out and they're done. and they're going to be done. So you have to, that خيارهم لنسائهم. This is basically, this is the akhlaq. Al-akhlaq is how you are rafiq, how you're gentle, how you let others also feel that you give them their honor. What does it mean to honor a person? It means that you honor their space. It means that you honor their pains. It means that you recognize that moment that they're probably not wanted to do something. You recognize them by recognizing their feelings, by recognizing their autonomy. This is part of honor. And of course, when we're speaking about al-qalb, winning the heart is more important than winning the argument. When you win the heart, you basically come in with love. You basically come in with a compromise. You don't come in with an opposition, but you come in with a composition, wanting to compose, wanting to embrace. That's when you would win the heart over winning the argument. Now, the last one is do not rush in disagreeing. That's sometimes hard for some. Sometimes we would right away think that, you know what, I know what you're going to say, and then not give time. Sometimes it's very good art to let the husband and wife practice and say, you know what, give me 5 minutes to speak. And then the other person basically, do not interrupt. Give me 5 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes. And we would stay silent. Hey, if you didn't know how to stay silent, get a pen and a paper and start writing down what you would like to comment. But then we would exchange and let the other person know. This is extremely important. Let the other person know that, especially husbands, for example, in certain cultures, disagreeing with the husband in certain cultures, they would interpret it as you are disrespecting my manhood, you are disrespecting my masculinity, you are trying to impose your ideas. So sometimes let that person know that you understand their fears and you don't mean to do it in the way that they might be in fear of, and that yes, I will respect your final decision and I will obey your final decision as long as it's not haram, and I will take it as you want, but allow me to have the right to say my opinion and say what I think, and allow me to disagree with you on one, two, three, but me disagreeing does not mean that I'm going to go against your final decision. It does. So sometimes letting the other person know that you disagreeing, it doesn't mean that you're going to make a different implementation or you're going to make a different decision. That no, I'm just going to lay out my idea. At the end of the day, you made this final decision. Let's say we're going to travel to this country, for example, and you thought, well, you know what? No, traveling to this country is a very bad idea. Here's why. One, two, three, four. And he insisted that, no, that's it. I looked into the situation, etc. We're going to be traveling to this country. I know it's a wrong idea. It's not right. This is going to be harmful for one, two, three reasons. Let the other person know your ideas, but then at the end of the day, is that he's going to be held accountable. With time, when you start basically laying out different ideas, with time, there's going to come a time when he would recognize your competence. He's going to recognize your competence. He's going to recognize your wisdom, to recognize that it really takes a number of different years to recognize that she basically should be respected, and she may have, let's say, that vision to see in certain situations, and I would need to listen to her. In the beginning of the marriage, he's basically not seeing your competence, not seeing your ability, but with time, he'll start seeing it. So I want you to be patient, and just remember Don't rush in disagreeing. Learn the art of dialogue between one another. If he's not listening, if he's not listening and probably not in a mood to listen, maybe sometimes when other people are around, maybe when his mom is around, he's not ready to listen because he wants to show that he's the man and not taking decisions from you, etc. Sometimes wait till you are basically alone and away from people to discuss the different matters, because it might be what's becoming an obstacle from your dialogue, from the dialogue between you and him, is basically the presence of maybe his sister or maybe his father or maybe his mother, etc. These people being present is making our communication basically, let's call it, there's an obstacle. So sometimes learn, is this person in a mood to listen? Are we here having other people possibly intruding and, let's say, influencing the how smooth this conversation is going? So sometimes you need to look at the circumstances before you make this dialogue. And the other part is the art of delivering the message. Sometimes talking to face is not always the right thing. Sometimes speaking to face, he feels offended. He feels that, okay, you're right there. Look at your voice. The face to face comes in as, there you go. This person is just feeling that you are at this person. And of course, especially if we're talking about certain personalities that may go up from, let's say, from the green zone to the red zone within a split of a second. He's quiet, and there's just a second that I probably brought up a certain name or probably brought up a certain idea. He went from the red or the green zone to the red zone within a split of a second. So in this situation, maybe I need to remove that name. Maybe I need to probably find a different way of how I deliver the message. Maybe it shouldn't be face to face. Maybe it's best if I email it. Maybe it's best if I text it. But here's one trick thing. One tricky thing is that when a person is away and you're texting the person, you may not know the situation that the other person is in. So you want to be careful sending messages. And certainly, as women, we tend to be very impulsive at many times. Where right now, and I see this often, when she wants to get married, she wants to get married right now. When she wants to get a divorce, she wants it right now. And they're very impulsive, and then they end up, it's like, I need to say what I want to say right now. Ladies, if you feel so angry, and during those moments when you feel so impulsive and you just feel your blood is boiling, you feel your blood is boiling and that you really have to say it, that's the time. Do not say it. That's the time. Do not say it, because the second you say it without you realizing, it can be a regret for life. You just have to recognize, if I'm so angry or if I'm in that situation of being really impulsive, you know what? Learn how to control your tongue whenever you are basically in an emotional state, or probably in a state of perhaps hormones. Do not make decisions when you are 2 days or 3 days prior to your cycle, or probably pregnant, or probably angry at something. Learn how to calm down. Learn how to make these decisions not when you are in a state of emotion, because guess what? Never make a long-term decision when you are in a fluctuating emotional state. You will regret it. So just keep that one in mind. Same thing, words. If you don't know how to control your words, you know what? Write whatever you want, just punch it in. Do not hit send yet until you reread your email when you're calmer. Do not hit send. Write it as a draft. It makes you feel better to write it as a draft. Put in all that anger that you want, and perhaps go to ChatGPT or whatever it is, Gemini, whatever it is, and just say, can you reword my words to make it seem calmer, if you don't know how to do it. reread it, resend, or at least redraft perhaps your sentences. Write it down. It feels good to just write down and just punch in all that anger on your keyboard or whatever it is, and then don't send it. Just wait. Just wait. It takes a split of a second to change a lot within your relationship. It takes a split of a second. So just write it down, make it into a draft, and then when you're ready emotionally, after rereading it and perhaps maybe changing the words, that's when you would hit send. Don't rush. Don't rush. That art of dialogue is one key thing in the relationship. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَظًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. الفظاظة is usually in tongue. الفظاظة is usually in the way that you communicate with the others. You can lose or win somebody just with one word. Just with one word. You can say, in fact, even al-iman al-kufr is a word. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, or getting out of it. It's a word. It's a word. But that word, not until it comes with the right intentions, will it make the complete change and the complete difference. So therefore, sincerity is not just in faith, but sincerity is also in the relationship that you basically engage with others. That's, remember, غليظ القلب, that's the same thing. Let your heart speak in humility. Let your heart speak in akhlaq. Let your heart speak in rahmah. Let your heart speak in sakan. Let your heart speak in mawadda. Let your heart speak in rifq. And you will see your tongue, your voice speaking in a different language. It's the music. It's the harmony. Your words and how your words sound, that's going to be the music. Music is an art. Music is basically a kind of magic. It's a kind of magic. And I'm not talking about music, the music things. I'm talking about the music of your voice. How you use it, it's an art. How you affect the people around you, it's an art. Learn how to, there's forgot what his name was, but he does a really good job. I can get you the name. And he basically talks about learning how to change and how to basically make an influence just with the sound of your voice. The sound of your voice is that music. If I were to, make a piece of music that sounds sad, you're going to find yourself just right away thinking of something sad. If I'm making something that's probably, making something like a drumming and all of that, you'll see people jumping up and dancing. It's not just people, but it's even animals. It's even animals. That's why Ruwaydanya and Jasha Lutfan bil Qawarir. And Jasha was making this music and the camels were scurrying and hurrying. Even though they're just animals. But even animals, and Al-Ghazali says, if you're not influenced and if you're not affected by music, then you basically are balid al-tab'. That's what he said. That means you are so harsh that you cannot even be moved by music. Music has a certain power. But here, I'm not talking about music as, songs and all of that, but I'm talking about the art of your voice is music. That's the halal music. The way you talk to your husband, the way you talk with your children, it's the music of either bringing delight or fight. Learn how to use it. How do I bring delight? is basically in your art of music? Or is your voice bringing in the type of music that means fight or flight? Boom. That's the art. Same thing. I can make a music. What are you doing? Oh, that's it. Something scary is going to happen. Or you can make a sound of music that sounds, something, even if it could be a very scary situation, etc. Or you could use probably the art and the background noise to make it seem funny or to make it seem easy and to make it seem like we're gonna get over this. That's okay. What did you do? Some people are just so smart in making very hard situations very easy, just by the art of music and how they control their words, how they control their own vocal cords. They basically use that as the music to bring about delight, even at the times of fight. They bring about basically the change in the other person by basically playing with this type of music. Yes, Helen. That's an art. That's that art. It's beautiful. All right, let's see. The other thing is that, of course, when we're speaking about what brings mawadda, النظر, sight. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Tell the believing men, and of course the believing women as well. We've got another ayah for the women to lower their gaze, lowering the gaze, especially in the midst of all this social media. Lowering your gaze lets you see what you have be your place of satisfaction. But once يطلق العنان, once your eyes are looking at different things, that's when you're not capable of finding satisfaction in what you have. And this is why it's really important to keep away. And pornography becomes as one of these things that can destruct relationships. Why? Because their imagination and their satisfaction is just in those areas that they cannot find a satisfaction with their companion, with their husband, or with their wife, because their eyes have been looking outside of that halal relationship, and that's when it ruined the relationship between them and their husband or their wife. And we're seeing, unfortunately, we're seeing more women as well. Before pornography was an addiction with only men, and barely women would get into that. Right now, we're seeing more women actually get hooked onto these types of things, unfortunately, and it's becoming something that is on the increase. Got to be really careful, because not only is it haram, but it will affect your ability to even reach the level of pleasure, even with your husband, because your mind is going to be looking at that pleasure done in a particular way, or at least it has to be to a certain level of a certain level of provoking certain things, whether in what you see and what you hear and all of these different behaviors, and without you realizing, you're not capable of reaching that level of pleasure, because you had been looking at haram things. So lowering the gaze, we're not just talking about porn here, but we're also talking about, hey, you want to see your husband or your wife as the most beautiful thing, you got to learn how to lower your gaze from looking at, especially right now with phones being accessible and all of these different filtered videos and filtered basically images are making you see, well, she's not as beautiful, she doesn't have the same beautiful body, she doesn't have the same this and this, and the list goes on, and then without you realizing, you're going to start going down and down and down with how you would see your spouse. They're going to start going down and down, and then at the end, you're going to see that not feeling satisfied. Satisfaction, in order to get to al-mawadda, that's why it's important to see with al-qalb, that involves a certain relationship. In nazar, that involves a certain, let's call it that sight, that relationship, that how I see, because what you see and what you feel and all of that relationship, that basically all is processed in your brain. All of that is processed in your brain, and that's going to determine how you like or dislike the person in front of you. So غض البصر is key. And speaking of which, even for the men and for the women, there are certain times, let's say using the bathroom, or certain times, perhaps maybe you definitely want to appreciate at least your spouse, by certain times always giving them certain times of privacy, because it will basically affect how you see the other person. And that's the same thing with, yeah, certainly. Just as the husband wants his wife to be fit and basically exercising and basically know, certain things on the body, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, well, just like the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا النِّسَاءُ شَقَائِقُ الرِّجَالِ. Women are the same thing. You want her to be, hey, kind of like this very fit size. Well, are you fit size yourself? You want her to be fit. You want her to be, what do they call that? That hourglass or whatever it is, shape. Well, are you right there? Probably, six pack and fit and all of that. Well, it goes both ways. Goes both ways. Definitely, we want both to basically be fit, and we want both to basically, work out and be healthy and all of that. But at the end of the day, is that lowering the gaze is one of those keys to help you find satisfaction between one another. All right, lowering the gaze is actually what brings delight to the heart. The Prophet ﷺ basically said, النظرة سهم من سهام إبليس المسمومة فمن تركها من خوف الله أثابه الله عز وجل إيمانا يجد حلاوته في قلبه. Look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said that النظرة, the eye, just one glance at something that is haram, it becomes like a poisoned spear that will affect the other person. It becomes like a poisoned spear. It goes into your heart, and then you basically would then not see the implications until perhaps later on. So if you leave it from out of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would replace them. The beauty of Iman they would find in their heart. The beauty of Iman they would find in their heart. So the Prophet ﷺ basically lets us know that the effect of halawat al-iman, or the effect of lowering the gaze, it doesn't just affect a person's relationship, but it even affects the person's iman. Affects the person's iman. Let's see right there, of course, إِذَا نَظَرَ إِلَيْهَا صَرَّتْ. Anyways, the Prophet ﷺ basically had described that a good wife, if his wife looks, well, if the man looks at her, basically at his wife, that she would bring delight to him. Why? Because she's beautifully dressed, beautifully smelled, and smelling great. Her words are beautiful. When she speaks, she's making delight in the space that she's living in. That's a woman that even the man would love. And, there were so many cases where I had coming to my office. The woman is so beautiful, but then, the man, he would go and actually find another person that is way, way less than this woman. Confuses me. But then when you end up somehow meeting the other person, you would see that, the chemistry, a lot of, you can be so beautiful in your appearance. But if you happen to be in your attitude not beautiful and not containing the person with your heart and feeling the person's pains, or probably understanding in the tongue and all of that. And if you're not up to there, your appearance is not enough. Appearance is important, there's no doubt. But subhanallah, you know, in a society that lives on social media and all of that, sometimes there's so much focus on appearance that the art of communication, the art of containing the other person, the art of feeling with the other person, their shortcomings, their fragility, their challenges, etc., that had been forgotten. And then this beautiful person is confused. I'm so beautiful. Why doesn't he see me that way? And sometimes you'll hesitate to say, well, you know what? Yes, you are beautiful in appearance, but when it comes to perhaps dealing with the other person, your appearance had gotten you into this arrogance. And arrogance, the other person, and no, whether it's male or female, once they feel that your arrogance is attempting to cancel their dignity, no matter who you are, no matter how beautiful you are, they'll start to withdraw, because every single person was born, and it is part of our instinct that we want to feel appreciated. We want to feel respected. We want to feel some certain level of honor and autonomy, male or female. It's even more in male than in female, but it's male or female in general. Our karama is the most precious thing to us. And money is the cheapest thing. How can money be the cheapest thing? Yes, money is the cheapest thing. Why? Because money comes and goes. Karama, your dignity, nothing can replace it. So just think of that. Not until you give the other person karama, not until you give the other person dignity, not until you respect their spaces, not until you respect them, will they really be for you. It's a territory. Keeping that understood is key. And yes, someone might like somebody that is not pretty at all. Not pretty at all. But that's really because they recognize their territory, they recognize their boundary, they recognize their fragility, they embrace it. And believe it or not, I mean, as much as beauty, certainly, I've done matchmaking, and certainly, we've got a lot of men that would focus on appearance than women, by the way. This is real. I know men can easily get fooled. And I would say sometimes women can be smarter in their choices in certain ways at certain times when it comes away. In theory, when women put and write their profile, they sound way more intelligent than men. When men write their profile and what they're looking for, the least I can say, majority are stupid. Sorry, this is real. Majority of the men do not know what they're looking for. They could easily be fooled. When men write their profile, I want her 5'6" and above. She has to be in a certain type of beauty. And then they're just looking for beauty. Just looking for beauty, looking for a certain amount of weight. They're looking for perhaps, yes, papers, etc. But They're really looking at appearance. Girls, no. You know, the irony is when these guys, they actually send us even profile photos. Maybe 90% of the guys actually send us their profile photos with eyeglasses. And I mean, you know, sunglasses. Sunglasses that are like two-thirds of their face, covering two-thirds of their face. I don't know why these guys actually think that that looks attractive, but whatever. Two-thirds of their face being covered. Girls, on the other hand, you know, it's a completely different thing. Okay. Girls, on the other hand, they would write down so much information about themselves, a lot of information. And sometimes this information for the guys, they don't even read all this information, by the way. You would expose too much of yourself. They don't expose too much of themselves. You ask the guy, write information, it's probably word, two, three words, five, six words, and that's basically it. And for each, and you would ask them to write the profile. It's literally like just a couple words. The profile is just a couple words long, and that's it. For the girls, they think that by making their profile bigger, that they are going to be finding what they're looking for faster, which is actually not accurate. First, the guys are not going to read all this profile. They don't listen too much. When you write too much, what the guy does not want is somebody that talks too much. That's when they just basically they just lock. So you write these profiles that are really long. The guy, the first thing that he wants to look at is just a couple words, and then he will judge your profile that you talk too much, that you are so self-centered, and that you are, and of course, you know, one thing is that in the girls' profiles, there's a lot of emotion in it. Girls write with emotions. So she'll be like, I want somebody that is caring, somebody that is loving, somebody that is friendly, somebody that is a companion, etc. What is she doing? She's actually showing her vulnerability. And she doesn't realize that. She's showing her vulnerability. And this guy, you know, they don't see that, yes, you are vulnerable and, you know, I'm going to be the caring guy, etc. They don't say that. They're just seeing that, yeah, she's vulnerable. She's talking like a girl right there, whatever. And they're just probably just skimming through your words, literally skimming through your words, not even reading everything. They'll skim, you know, I can guarantee you, you would give this guy, here's a profile, and there's no way that you read it in that few seconds. But no, 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 that's it. Okay, nope, not interested. Swipe. That's it. Okay. So I just want you to sometimes, you know, just look at look at that and just see some things, and of course when we're talking about profiles, and that's the same thing when we're talking about the relationship, reducing that talk and the art of listening is actually key, is one key to learning how to create a relationship. Let me go for the final part, the private part, and the art of making love. Okay. And one thing is that I do understand that from one society to another, there tends to be some differences, some expectations, expectations of what the wife is doing, what the husband is doing. And of course, with social media and all that fitna that basically is around the internet, etc., that sometimes can make the communication in the art of making love sometimes become a place of fitna, a place of miscommunication. So the easiest way that I would really recommend in that art of making love is communicate. Learn how to communicate what you like, what he likes, what are the expectations of one another in that area. That's a personal thing that you would communicate with one another without thinking bad of the other, or without thinking that the other person maybe has a wrong history, etc. No, without having su'idhan. That's something that is out of that area that Islam had allowed you to live within, but Islam told you do not have su'ul dhann. This is basically fitra. Let each and every single one of you figure out that art, figure out what you expect, and basically communicate it with one another. But one thing is that the Prophet ﷺ has said, إذا دعا الرجل امرأته فلتجب وإن كانت على ظهر قتب. If the Prophet ﷺ had said, if the man invites his wife to intimacy, basically, that she should respond even if she was basically baking bread or, having some food on the stove or whatever it is, that she would basically come in. So is it the same for the husband? I know that I had one time a woman contact me. And she said, I invited my husband, but he didn't accept and he wasn't ready for it. And he said he's not ready for it. Well, that's not fair. How come I have to be ready? Couple things. Number one is that the woman's anatomy is different than the man's anatomy. There's no doubt. If she is not ready psychologically for, let's say, her, I don't know, her mother died or something happened, and of course, if she's not ready psychologically, or throughout the whole day, he was basically nagging and he was yelling at her, and at the end of the night, he's like, "Okay, let's go to bed." I mean, wait a minute, what did you just say right now? Did you recognize that throughout the whole day you were making my life hell? And that's one thing. The Prophet ﷺ had basically scolded these types of men. The Prophet ﷺ basically scolded these types of men and called them like mules. That throughout the day, he would make her life basically hard. And then at the end of the day, basically call her to intimacy. The Prophet ﷺ called him like a mule. This is important, that for women, there's a blend of psychology, there's a blend of body, there's a blend, it's completely different. The way that a woman is excited, or at least is, let's say, the way her body functions, it basically is also controlled by emotions and her psychology. But a man, it's a completely different system. A man's system is a completely different system. And that's why it is not the same when a woman, for example, her husband invites her to intimacy. It's not the same as when a woman would invite her husband, because he cannot just press a button and here we go, let's get into this. It doesn't work like that. So the key thing to having basically the husband give the woman what she needs is basically to make him as comfortable psychologically as much as you can. And the same thing we would say, well, if you want your wife to be available for you, you have to make happy wife makes a happy life. All right. But is it the same level of request? Is it the same level of obligation? It's not the same level of obligation that we would say, okay, if the wife needs her husband, then he has to basically somehow, be available, because it's not within his hands. It's not within his hands to basically say, oh, okay, so you want it? Okay, I'm ready. It's not within his hands because he doesn't fully control it. But she can be available unless she's feeling pain and there was darar. If there's harm, then harm, look, whether it was basically something that the doctor said, hey, you can't be intimate for 3 weeks because you're having internal bleeding, all these different things. Well, that's a different thing. Then she can say, sorry, but I'm not available right now. Same thing. If, for example, something was not necessarily, let's say, doctor diagnosed, but she's feeling pain and she doesn't know yet why there is pain. So in that situation, we'll say, sorry, Mr. Husband, but she's not yet right now ready because she's feeling pain. Now, here's the thing. What if it's not necessarily pain? She's just feeling tired, not in a mood for it, etc. Well, there's good news, is that even if you're not in a mood for it, just remember, this is ibadah. You're getting rewarded for it. If this is ibadah and you're getting rewarded for it just by being available, hey, you're getting a bonus of ibadah. You're getting a bonus for a credit. You just have to be available and certainly engage in a way to bring about il-iffa to your husband. You have to remember that this is a way of ibadah. If, of course, there's no harm, this is a way of ibadah. So being available for your husband, and your body is capable of being available. Okay, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created your body basically capable of engaging, even if you may not be, let's say, in a mood for it, unless there's harm, that's a different story. Okay, and your body is capable of being available, or else the Prophet ﷺ would not have said that that was something that you're capable of doing, or that is something that you have to be doing if there was harm. Because Sharia is maslaha kulha. Everything in Sharia is basically for the benefit of both. So this is not at all disregarding you or somehow, yes, the man is engaging in marital rape. There's no such thing in Islam as marital rape. No such thing as marital rape, okay? Yes, certainly it is not from the etiquettes of Islam that the man would force himself onto her if she is basically not ready or probably going through pain or etc. That's definitely, or even psychologically, you made her day throughout the day be, just nagging and you're yelling and you're all of that, and then at the end of the day you're basically like a mule, not even respecting that psychologically you made her not prepared, so you have to work on preparing her. Anyhow, so, but when you, what was I saying? I forgot, Ya Allah, subhanAllah, I forgot the point that I was trying to make. I forgot the point that I was trying to make. To make the story short, of course, that there's no marital rape. That's the point that I was making. There's no marital rape in Islam because consent was done on the day of marriage contract. That's why there's no such thing as marital rape. Okay, consent was done on the day of the marriage contract. And of course, the secular courts would basically say, well, marital rape and all of that, because they would regard that consent is to be done at the time of intimacy. Islam basically says, well, wait a minute, we can't actually know that, because if we're talking about a punishment, the general law is idra'ul hududa bishubhat. We would have to avoid, or we would have to basically pause any criminal punishment just by having a doubt, by having some kind of a doubt whether there was consent, for example, in this situation or not. Okay? And how would we know whether the consent, was it supposed to be verbal or was it supposed to be signed and put at the bedroom door or whatever? So Islam tells you, no, the consent was done on the day of the marriage contract. So therefore, we wouldn't consider that as marital rape. No such thing as marital rape in Islam. But we will say that if there is harm, if there was, a psychological issue that you did not take in consideration, we will consider it as khawarim al-muru'ah, or we will consider that as lacking the right etiquette, but not rape. Not rape. Marital rape does not exist in Islam because the consent happened on the day of the marriage contract. Okay, so just to explain, basically this is al-mawadda, and inshallah, next week we'll be talking about al-rahma. We'll also be talking about the rest of those slides, inshallah. So in the meantime, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. I know we talked a lot today. There was a lot that was